Hello and welcome to a new project. Nope, it's not a Jeep, but an old beater pickup truck with a long, sentimental family history. So why this truck? And what are the plans for it? Well, to answer all that, we'll have to first rewind all the way back to the beginning. Our story begins over 1,200 miles away in Yakima County, Washington. It's the summer of 2019, and we're here to see the truck in person for the first time in over a decade. And this is it, a 1967 GMC Fleetside. This one is a two-wheel drive model that came with an old school V6 engine and 3-speed manual transmission. This 3/4-ton version came with a 127-inch wheelbase and the notable long wooden bed in the back. The mileage is a bit unclear, somewhere between 38,000, 138,000, or 238,000. I'm not really sure on that, but it does have some nice old-school patina and weathering and dents over the last 55 years of its lifespan. So why this specific truck? Out of every possible option out there, what makes this one so special? Well, it's personal. This truck has been in the family for over 40 years. And when my dad, who you've seen many times helping out with the Jeep projects and often getting caught in a dust cloud behind me on our rides, decided that he wanted to build a project truck, he ultimately settled on this exact truck, which was his grandpa's and my great-grandpa's. While his first thoughts for picking a project truck ranged from an early 70s to a mid-80s style of Chevy, there quickly became the burning question of what happened to Grandpa's old truck. James Strieber, my great-grandpa, lived a long and fascinating life. After being born into ranching life in Oklahoma, he went on to join the U.S. Navy at the young age of 17. He served aboard the heavy cruiser USS New Orleans and saw immediate action at Pearl Harbor on that fateful day in 1941. While his ship made it out mostly unscathed, the New Orleans and much of the Pacific Fleet would later go on to engage in the Battle of Midway and the Battle of the Coral Sea in 1942. Perhaps his most interesting of all stories, though, came at the Battle of Tassafaronga in the ocean outside Guadalcanal. In the heart of battle, the fleet came under attack, and when the lead ship was hit by torpedoes, the New Orleans, in column formation, was forced to steer to the side to avoid collision and was ultimately hit by additional torpedoes. The bow and everything ahead of the number 2 turret was completely severed, and to avoid sinking, the crew reversed into a nearby harbor where they camouflaged the ship and made a temporary bow out of coconut logs. From there, they sailed backwards for 12 days at a blistering 2 knots towards Sydney for temporary repairs. And from there, they would continue their backward voyage, sailing all the way to Puget Sound, Washington for final repairs in 1943. After a less eventful rest of the war, my great-grandpa eventually settled down on 360 acres of property in the small town of Grandview, located in south central Washington, to continue ranching, but would go on to work as a general contractor for most of his life. He bought this truck secondhand in 1975 and used it as a work truck. The truck would take him to work sites and construction projects in the area surrounding his home, which he also built on the property, and was often used by the grandkids when learning to drive. When he passed away in 2009, the truck, which at this point was rarely used, was passed down to family members who occasionally used it as a farm truck. Within a few years, however, it was towed away to a local wrecking yard where it would presumably sit abandoned and forgotten for the rest of its days. That is, until this story. When the burning question of what happened to Grandpa's truck popped up, the backtracking began, and the truck was found still sitting in that same wrecking yard where it had been for the last 8 years. and although it had lost a hood and grill along the way, something told the owner of the yard not to crush the truck, and it was eventually towed back to the family property where it had spent much of its early life. With the truck now safely secured, it became a matter of getting the thing back home to Arizona. By this point, it hadn't ran in a while, and after sitting in a field for about a year since the wrecking yard, had started to blend in with the scenery. Unfortunately, the driver's side door was frozen shut and the passenger side window had been left open, meaning it had been exposed to all kinds of weather. But surprisingly, it remained in decent shape. Grandpa's keys were still in the ignition, and the glove box was full of insurance cards, work tools, and an assortment of nails, which seemed to be spread all throughout the truck from its days of general contracting work. Before even getting the truck rolling, the first order of business was getting some of the junk cleared out. Both inside the cab and the bed would need several rounds of cleaning, but this preliminary effort did help slightly. It appeared that my great-grandpa added some kind of custom mirrors along the way, and to ensure that those wouldn't get clipped on the long drive home, we took them off. The tires, while still generally round-ish, were in need of some air. After a little bit of preliminary maintenance, we called it a day at this point. Tomorrow we would need to move the truck to a paved road since it was currently buried deep behind the property. It had been a pretty emotional day, reuniting with the truck, getting to catch up with family, and spending time on the property where my great-grandparents lived for so long. After enjoying some downtime with family, we picked up the next afternoon. While the truck wasn't able to drive under its own power, it could at least roll, so hooking up a tow strap and dragging it out was easy. With our cousins at the helm of the tow truck and Grandpa's truck, and with a bit of encouragement, the truck was quickly pulled out of the brush, alongside a freeway, and through a field. And while only moving a few hundred feet and going a few miles an hour, the long journey home was now officially underway. It didn't take long to get to a paved road where loading the truck onto a transport truck would be much easier. Seeing the truck rolling and even slightly cleaned up was a sight for sore eyes. It had been quite a journey so far, losing track of it, finding it again, and getting it ready for a 1,200-mile move to a new home. The original plan from here was to have the truck towed home by a transport company, which would save on gas, time, and effort. But despite having scheduled this far in advance and waiting around for a solid day and a half, no one ever came. No one called. So it was officially on to Plan B. It would now be up to us to load the truck and trailer it all the way home. After returning the rental car across the state, we swapped our smooth and comfortable ride for, well, something slightly slower. Unfortunately, due to the last-minute nature of our plan and the lack of any other great alternatives, we'd be driving a completely empty truck with the GMC pickup on a trailer behind. After attempting a few different methods, we eventually got the truck onto the trailer and strapped down. Since it was nearly the end of the day, we enjoyed another dinner with the family and planned to begin the long trek back home at the crack of dawn tomorrow morning. Until then, the U-Haul and truck sat in Washington for one more night. we were up bright and early the following morning. We pulled out of Grandview at 6 a.m. sharp and hit the first of many, many fuel stops where we stocked up on all the essential road trip snacks. We headed south out of town from there. The route all the way home would be around 1,220 miles, which at normal driving speed would take about 18 and a half hours. But with the trailer and truck, things would be just a bit slower for us. Fortunately, we only had about 50 miles of Washington to cover, which, after a short, scenic area, quickly turned into endless fields. For the trip back, we really didn't have a set plan. The goal was to push as far as possible on the first day. With no hotel reservations, we anticipated staying the night somewhere in Nevada and then completing the rest of the drive to Phoenix the following day. It didn't take long to cross the mighty Columbia and cross into Oregon, where the trucks are longer and the town's named after whiskey. Which is a joke, I'm not that much of an idiot. The terrain through eastern Oregon became slightly more mountainous, and although our pace and gas mileage was destroyed through this section, spirits were still high. The views were nice, and we were steadily making progress. Nothing had fallen off the truck yet, and the sustained highway cruise up to this point had done a little bonus cleaning for us, which was nice. We descended out of the mountains and slowly worked our way into our third state of the trip, Idaho. Now about 5.5 hours into the trip, we filled up outside of Boise before getting back on the road. After another couple of hours, we crossed the Snake River and eventually split south onto Highway 93, which we would stay on nearly all the way back home. We grabbed lunch on the road and pushed on, through a bit of weather, on our final stretch through Idaho. It was about 3 p.m. when we passed through Jackpot, Nevada. We were still making great time, and up to this point, my dad had been behind the wheel the whole time, probably running on pure adrenaline and excitement from getting the truck. The views through this section of Nevada were big. The mountains seemed to be endless, and the lonesome roads made it feel even more remote. We continued the long push south. After getting to the point of counting how many lane markers were in each mile, I eventually got the chance to drive by the time we reached central Nevada. Dinner was on the road, and we continued our push with the truck still faithfully following right behind us. By this point, we had mutually agreed that Las Vegas would be our goal for the night. The desert slipped into darkness as the miles and the hours continued to tick by. Mercifully, around midnight, the lights of town came into view. We quickly got parked and headed to the closest hotel. Today had been a huge push, but meant we now had a much shorter stretch to complete tomorrow to get back to Phoenix. We ironically ended up at the Grandview bar, which seemed to bring our day full circle, and enjoyed a few drinks before getting some much needed sleep. The next day, we jumped back on the road home, quickly covering the last few miles of Nevada. It didn't take long, and the truck was now in its new home, and we were back in the Grand Canyon state. The rugged desert views were a much welcomed sight, although the heat left a lot to be desired. The final few hours were uneventful as we approached the home stretch. We filled up one last time and were soon back in familiar territory. As we rounded the final corner, it felt good to get the truck home. The journey up to Washington to get the truck and then the 1,200-mile drive home had been quite the adventure. And while it didn't go quite as expected, our mission was accomplished, and my dad now had this start to his project truck, which at this point was just getting underway. The plans for the truck in the future include swapping out the powertrain, restoring the interior portions and lifting the truck to a level somewhere between, wow, that's tall, and is that even street legal? We got the truck unloaded into the garage for temporary storage while we waited for cooler weather. Although, with its long bed, that was easier said than done, and ended up needing a few modifications, including removing the mud flaps and rear bumper to get it to actually fit. But that's going to be it for this part of the project. A huge thank you to our Washington family for the help along the way, to my Aunt Melanie for tracking down the truck and for giving us a place to stay, and to Franz and Yvonne and the kids for the help moving the truck, some fantastic food, and the great hospitality. Stay tuned for a limited run of updates and modifications going forward as we work to turn this project from an old, forgotten work pickup into my dad's dream truck. Thanks for watching this one, and as always, we'll see you on the next one.